Before World War II ended on May 8, 1945, German and Axis forces were squeezed into a confined space by the crushing weight of the Western Allies and Soviet Union. Die-hard pockets of German resistance seemed fanatical to the Allies, and this was especially true for the Germans facing the Soviets. Before his death on April 30, 1945, Adolf Hitler had issued a series of Festungsbefehle, or fortress orders. These orders told military commanders, Gauleiters, and mayors that their cities and towns were not to be surrendered. Every German, soldier, and civilian was to fight to the last man, woman, and child. On May 4, 1945, just 4 days before the official surrender of Nazi Germany, an unlikely alliance of Germans and Americans joined forces to fight other Germans in a battle that almost defied logic. What was Castle Itter? Why was it important, if at all? What caused Germans to join Americans in the fight? What was the result of this action?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History.
Castle Itter was a medieval fortress in the Tyrolean mountains of Austria that had been used as a prison for high-value Allied prisoners, and by May 1945, the prisoner count at Castle Itter was just 14 persons. With Allied troops closing in, the German guards abandoned the castle, leaving the prisoners unattended. Although the prisoners were now free, they had no place to go, as units of Waffen-SS and Gestapo were still present in the surrounding area, rounding up deserters and hanging them with civilians who were deemed lacking the proper fighting spirit. As it so happened, elements of the 17th Waffen-SS Panzer Grenadier Division Gerz von Berlichingen were there, along with Gestapo assets. The 17th SS was one of the few SS formations to be deployed exclusively on the Western Front during World War II. The 17th SS commander, SS Oberfuhrer Georg Bochmann, had his orders and issued them to his soldiers, and they would have had no issue shooting any escaping prisoners on sight. Bochmann and his remaining troops had been retreating through Bavaria to the south, ending up in Austria after he refused suicidal orders from Generalfeldmarschall Ferdinand Schorner to attack Allied troops. Bochmann was working with a less than quarter-strength division, low on ammunition, and no tank support, so he decided to save his men's lives, and as a result, he was dismissed from his post, and plans were started to court-martial him. But Bochmann, being a battle-hardened combat veteran and no-nonsense SS officer, was no fool, and he was a highly decorated recipient of the Knight's Cross or the Iron Cross with oak leaves and swords. Georg Bochmann received his orders to go to the nearby castle and execute all prisoners who remained there, so time was running out for the very important prisoners, some of whom Prime Minister Winston Churchill and President Harry S. Truman wanted to see stay alive. The German soldiers remaining in the castle wanted no part of murder. The castle's cook, Andreas Krobot, knew the SS and Gestapo were coming, so he walked to the small town of Vergel. The first person Krobot ran into was highly decorated Army Major Josef Gangl, who still commanded a handful of about 20 surviving loyal troops. Krobot could not have been luckier because Gangl had never been on board with the Nazis' ideology, and he was very disillusioned with the waste and death, and he had no respect for the SS. In fact, Gangl had received orders to hand his men over to Bochmann and place them under his command, but he refused. But Gangl had already joined the local Austrian anti-Nazi resistance, which was in fact mostly communist, and had become their leader. He had become disillusioned with Nazi ideology long ago, and so defied his recent orders for his unit to rejoin the SS, deciding instead to spend the final days of the war helping those who wished to resist them. After speaking with Crobut, Gaulle knew that his 2 squads numbering about 20 soldiers could not save the prisoners at the castle, at least not by themselves. Gaulle decided to carry a white flag, and he drove towards the nearest American unit he could find. And he was in luck. The American unit closing in was the 23rd Tank Battalion of the 12th Armored Division, and the lead element was commanded by Captain John C. Lee, who accepted Gaulle's surrender, but he was more interested in what the German officer had to say. Gaulle explained the situation, who the prisoners were, and that the 17th SS had orders to kill anyone in the castle, and he told them that their commander, Borkmann, was indeed a fanatic. Most of the prisoners who could leave had already joined Gaulle's small unit and verified his story. Some of the German soldiers fighting had previously been the jailers who allowed them to escape, including the commander of the jail, Sebastian Wimmer. The inmates under sentence of death were primarily French and included some pro-Nazi Vichy government members who had turned politicians, various resistance leaders, including the professional tennis player Jean Barotra. The most high-profile prisoner was Paul Reynaud, the French politician and lawyer who opposed Nazi Germany and resisted its occupation of France in World War II. He had served as prime minister twice in 1932 and 1940 and was imprisoned by the Germans until 1945. Churchill, Truman, and even Charles de Gaulle all wanted him out and safe. Lee believed the German officer in front of him and made the decision to accept the alliance, and he led all the soldiers to the castle, which was a defensible position and commanded the high ground. He radioed for additional support, but no one knew if anyone would arrive in time. As the late afternoon was giving way to evening, Lee ordered his men to set up a defensive perimeter around the castle, digging in their machine guns and intersecting fields of fire. Gaulle's soldiers joined the Americans and the prisoners, shoulder to shoulder, digging and preparing for what they knew would be a violent attack. The Americans handed out guns and ammunition to their new German and French comrades, and Lee's Sherman was parked outside the front gate entrance to provide additional fire support. It was a long night as they waited for the battle to come. At 0400 hours on May 5, 1945, Borkmann arrived, and he sent a patrol to the castle as the rest of his available soldiers surrounded the castle. It is unclear what happened next, but it appears that Major Gaulle may have called out to the SS troops to leave the castle or surrender. Borkmann, who arrived to survey the situation, was apparently less than amused at the insolent gesture and ordered his soldiers, which only numbered some 150 men at that time, to attack, while waiting for the rest of his division, numbering some 6,000 remaining troops, depending upon the sources, could arrive. The bulk of the 17th SS had to consolidate their force and march on foot, having few vehicles and almost no fuel. Most of the troops were over 20 miles away. The 150 SS men on site found the defense solid, as they saw every approach to the castle was a well-established kill zone, channeling the SS, who had limited options for approaching the castle other than a direct assault, and they had to fight uphill. In preparation, Lee and Gaulle had established a layered defensive belt in case the outer defense line fell, and survivors could fall back closer to the castle, reinforce the next line, and so on, with the final defensive line being inside the castle proper. By the early afternoon, the Sherman, along with its radio, had been destroyed by Panzerfaust and grenades, as well as on-call mortar fire from the SS troops, and the defenders were running low on ammunition. Fortunately, Lee had managed to radio out once again for support, giving his position and situation before his second radio was shot up and he lost communication. He had no idea that his call for help was even received, as he did not receive a confirmation from any recipient. The American, German, and French defenders had been fighting together for almost 10 hours, hanging on for dear life as Borkmann kept pushing his arriving troops into the battle to root out the defenders, who were now being pushed further back, deeper, and closer to the castle. until the defenders finally fell back into their last line of defense just inside the structure. Bullets tore through stone walls and mortar rounds rained down from the hills. This was when Paul Reynaud ran out of ammunition and was falling back with the others when he tripped and fell, with bullets kicking dirt and stones around them. Seeing the danger and knowing how valuable he was, Gaulle pulled him up and shielded him from hostile fire, but he took the bullet from a sniper and was killed. He was, in fact, the only fatality up to that time, but time was running out. But luckily again for Lee and his new friends, his last radio call was picked up, and within a few hours reinforcements arrived from the 142nd Infantry Regiment, just as the defenders were about to be overrun late that afternoon. The new American arrivals hit the left flank of Bochmann's troops, giving the defenders a much-needed respite, and killed the majority of the SS present and captured about 100 men, thereby saving the day. Luckily, the bulk of the 17th SS, made up mostly of fresh, green, and untested soldiers, never made it to the battle, being unable to join in the fight, having been tied down in another fight, having no transportation, soldiers deserting, and also they're being attacked by partisans. Most of the SS troops involved at Itter, who were still alive, surrendered on sight, although Bochmann and some men escaped and later surrendered on May 9th to United States troops in the Rotach-Egern area. Major Josef Gaulle was later honored as an Austrian national hero, and a street near Bergel was named after him, where he was buried. And Lee was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military decoration for soldiers who display extraordinary heroism in combat against an armed enemy force. Not only was the Battle of Castle Itter one of the most incredible, remarkable, and improbable events of the entire Second World War, it was also a pivotal moment in history. Georg Bochmann died on June 8, 1973. The French prisoners were safe. The defenders, American, German, and French, had done the seemingly impossible.
Thank you for watching this episode of Forgotten History. If you liked what you saw, please click like, share, and subscribe. And if you would like to assist with the ever-increasing cost of production, please consider becoming a channel member and joining our Patreon page. Please check out our merchandise store. And thanks for watching.